Serious. 911 operators of Reddit. What is a call that keeps you up at night? It was 9:30 a.m. I'd been on shift since 7 a.m. All the ambulances had checked in for morning mileage and radio checks. All was good. Call comes in on the emergency line. My son is not breathing. Okay, we got this. Start going through the steps of checking for a pulse, breath, while dispatching the closest ambulance. I'm almost to the part where we start CPR when the ambulance calls back, "Dispatch, our rig is dead." You got to be fucking kidding me. You called in this morning with a radio check. Did you not check your goddamn ambulance? Nearest ambulance is one whole county over. 30 minutes. 30 minutes for a situation that needs immediate medical intervention. The mother is screaming on the phone, crying. The sister comes in and starts screaming the name of her brother. I have to tell them the ETA for an ambulance is 30 minutes. It's been almost 10 years since I was in EMS dispatch, and I occasionally wake up in a cold sweat thinking about that call. That's fucking tough. Did the child survive? I was a dispatcher about 17 years ago. There were some funny calls I like to talk about, like the person who wanted to complain that their drug dealer stole their laptop. The one I don't like the most is the long call with the woman who was concerned about the landlord who didn't like her, and her boyfriend was in the background confirming her statements that the landlord was creepy. They found her body floating in the river the next day. Except it turned out it was the boyfriend who killed her. Also, the recorded calls you have to listen to during training, where they intentionally play you the sound of people dying on the phone while talking to a dispatcher so that you understand what the job might entail and they can see how you react to it to see if you can stomach it and keep talking and providing details to units. I can imagine it's a mix of heart-wrenching calls, mixed with ones from people who didn't get enough fries. My friend was a dispatcher in a rural area. They'd get calls about cows out roaming around. I got a 911 call about a vehicle that ran off the road. The caller told me that the female driver was unconscious but had a pulse. He then proceeded to tell me that the passenger was a fatal. I asked if he had checked for a pulse, at which point he told me no. It was a young child that had been decapitated. I asked him to find anything he could to cover the child because I didn't want the mother to regain consciousness and have that be the last image she had of her child. I am so glad you asked for that. I am sure the family also appreciates it. Thank you for what you do. 1 a.m. and the phone rings and I pick up to hear a man screaming on the other end. No words, just screaming. Finally get him to tell me what happened, and he told me he heard a gunshot in his house and went to see what happened and found his brother in his room. He had shot himself. Former operator. Victim needed police. A bit later hearing shots and screaming. Then silence for a bit. Hear another voice angrily saying, "No," and hangs up. Was caught. Oh my god, that's horrifying. So I've had plenty of heartbreaking calls, but the one that actually keeps me up is because it was so weird and disturbing rather than tragic. So set up. I work medical and we cover a fairly large geographic area. Calls come over with minimal info from the first call takers, so we know location and that it's a medical issue. Okay, tell me exactly what happened? Standard first question. A young-sounding woman replies pretty calmly but energetically. My back hurts. And Uncle Ricky is real. She proceeded to explain that she had chronic back pain, and that she'd been in the hospital the day before because of it. But they didn't refill her meds while she was there. And Uncle Ricky made her throw her old ones out. The more we talk, the more irrational and erratic her answers got. I ask her to make sure the door is unlocked and pets are put away, and she says the door is open. Then she tells me about her cat and that it's already outside. Don't tell Uncle Ricky about her cat. He made them kill the last cat she had. Her dad and her cousins. They killed all the cats. But they're locked up now. She named off all her cats for me. There were a lot. She mentions that there's a Sasquatch outside. She can see its eyes in the woods. She kept this up for 20 minutes. Just before the ambulance arrives, she starts talking to someone who got there first. It's a patrol car that had been quietly sent. First thing the officer asks after addressing her by name, which wasn't the one she'd told me. How did you get inside this house? There was a logic in her rambling, a terrible consistency about her Uncle Ricky. But there was plenty of random mental health delusions in her conversation. And she was 30 miles out of town in a house that wasn't hers. Don't know what happened to her or what had happened to her. How much of what she told me was real or fantasy, of nightmarish delusion meant to lie to herself. I wonder whose house she was in, where they were, or why she picked that house. What was out in the woods looking at her? Was there even a cat there? Was Uncle Ricky actually real? In the end, long mental health calls trouble me the most. Delusional people tell almost believable stories with deep honesty. They've told me about werewolves and demons and ghosts at the foot of their bed. Some say their upstairs neighbor is poisoning them when they live alone. Most of the time there is no follow-up on what was really happening, at least for the call takers. Wondering how truthful the strange, frightening stories keeps me up at night. I spent a few years volunteering on a mental health helpline, and yeah, the floridly psychotic calls are super intense. We would focus on validating feelings, fear, sadness, anger, etc., without validating experiences, Uncle Ricky, Sasquatch, etc. While trying to make an agreement, they would talk with someone in their life about their worries, preferably a medical professional. You're never going to be able to sort out truth from delusion in a single call, so there's no point in trying. Building rapport and linking to supports are the goals. It sounds like you did a great job. Not quite sure if this counts, but my father works EMS. If you get a proper segue into the topic, he will tell you about the worst calls he's been on. The worst call I've heard was a suicide. Never a good case. He remembers arriving and seeing the guy's troubled loved ones. He made his way to the bedroom and got the scene of the bloody and gory mess ingrained into his head permanently. It was a suicide by 12-gauge blast to the face. He didn't eat for a few days and had to take off of work to digest the incident. I was the first person to find my ex after he did the same thing. My guess is he put the shotgun in his mouth, but there wasn't enough left to tell. It's so incredibly awful, and I can definitely understand why your dad had to take off. The officer that did most of the talking told us that he's been doing his job for 35 years and only seen about 4 of them. They never get easier. The first few weeks afterward were horrible. I remember struggling to find anything I could eat. I was an involuntary vegetarian for at least a month. It's been almost 2 years and I still struggle with hamburger when I cook. Spilled cola, Dr. Pepper also sets me off. I'm extremely grateful for the people who showed up. My memory is patchy, but there were 5 to 7 police cars and at least 1 ambulance. Every one of them willingly walked into the house. That still gives me nightmares. Someone had to literally pick up the pieces and put him in a body bag, and I have crippling PTSD just from looking at it for less than a minute. I would never ever wish that on anyone, but I am sincerely thankful that people like your dad do the job they do. I'm a firefighter and I overheard a call on the radio from another unit. They were dispatched to a possible suicide. The information given while the crews were en route was, patient's wife came home and found a note on the door saying, "Honey, I'm already gone. If you're reading this, please do not come in and see me like this." The crews arrived and the next thing you hear on the radio was the paramedic telling dispatch, "Code 4, meaning patient is diseased." And in the background you can hear the wife screaming bloody murder as loud as she could. It was chilling. Doesn't keep me up at night, but I do think about it time to time. Had a daughter call in for her elderly mother experiencing chest pains. 10 minutes pass and I call for an ADA. They tell me they're there. The daughter gave me the wrong address. They had recently moved and she gave the old address. The chest pains turned to trouble breathing. ADA 10 minutes. Mother isn't responding. Daughter is crying over the line. Paramedics arrive, perform CPR and even use the defibrillator. Sadly, she didn't make it. I heard all this over the phone at the time. It hit me a bit hard, but you get over it. I feel sorry for the daughter. She probably lives thinking that she was responsible for giving the wrong address and causing her mother to pass away. Hubby of a former dispatcher. She worked nights by herself and I think hadn't even worked a year there. Knew the officers really well since obviously she was the only person there. Officer pulls a guy over for a routine stop, but whatever reason he pulled a gun and shot the officer, then took off. Officer calls in to dispatch, so she's calling EMTs and all that and gives the mile marker. From my understanding, other cops got on the scene first and we're with him. EMT calls back for the location and she somehow gave the wrong one. Off by like a mile. She was pretty shaken by it as it was someone she considered a friend. He lived. She found out later about the mix-up like a week later. It didn't seem to affect anything or delay him getting help, but it messed her up worse. Got put on leave and no one in the department could talk to her. Got PTSD from it and was in a bad place for a while. She's much better now and no longer a dispatcher. Medical dispatch here. No call keeps me up at night. None. If you do this job and these things stick to you, you either won't last long or your mind will deteriorate. You might wonder how I do it, and it's quite simple. I approach each and every call as a case-by-case problem. And each problem needs different solutions. To me, I don't help someone, I solve a problem. Sure, I feel empathy and anger sometimes, but it passes and disappears in a matter of seconds. In the end, I do my job as mechanically as possible, and it doesn't make a difference for the caller but changes the world for me and my health. Fire, EMT here and same. I don't care what led up to us being dispatched. I care about what I can see. Can I do something? If yes, then follow protocols and don't screw up. Did the protocols work? If yes, then good job. If no, was there anything else I could have done? As long as I do everything I can and do it correctly, then it was meant to be. I learned early on in my career not to dwell on bad things. Learn from it and get ready for the next one. My aunt listened to a 12-year-old girl and her friend get murdered by her dad. She hasn't been the same since.
Thank you so much for watching and have a good day.